To fans of classic noir, Lawrence Tierney was a screen-devouring presence, hard-nosed, steel-eyed, the kind of guy whose shadow had sharp edges. And for a young Tarantino helming his first feature, Reservoir Dogs, casting Tierney as Joe Cabot felt like cinematic poetry, the old-school gangster in a new-school bloodbath. But when the cameras started rolling, the romanticism dried up fast. Tierney was chaos in khakis. He forgot lines. He fought direction. Worse, he clashed directly and loudly with Tarantino. And for a first-time director trying to maintain control over an ensemble cast of alpha personalities and tight schedules, Tierney was a ticking bomb in every scene. Michael Madsen once described Tierney as a storm cloud that decided which day to rain. Every take became a gamble. Could they capture the magic before Tierney exploded? Tarantino, only 29 at the time, didn't flinch. One particularly explosive argument over set blocking ended with Tarantino storming off set and returning only to fire Tierney personally. Cold, final, done. And perhaps the most Tarantino part of it all? He never spoke of Tierney again. No nostalgic anecdotes, no retrospective commentary. When Reservoir Dogs became a cult classic celebrated in film schools and Reddit threads, Tierney remained an uncredited ghost in its legacy. In Tarantino's world, silence isn't passive, it's a purge. Tierney wasn't just cut from any future roles, he was cut from the mythology. And when Quentin cuts you that way, you don't even get a last line. So what was it really? Disrespect? Disruption? Or did Tarantino just see something in Tierney that reminded him of the old Hollywood he wanted to burn down? Whatever the spark, the result was permanent severance. Tierney never returned, never got a call, and never saw another frame of a Tarantino project again. From chaos to calculated cool, our next story turns to a star who lent his name, his face and maybe too much ego to Quentin's most iconic film. A man who helped launch Pulp Fiction into the zeitgeist and got left behind in the afterglow. By the time Pulp Fiction hit theaters in 1994, Bruce Willis was standing at a crossroads, known globally for Die Hard, but weighed down by a string of critical and commercial failures. Color of Night, Striking Distance, Hudson Hawk. Hollywood had begun whispering the unthinkable. Was Bruce past his prime? Enter Quentin Tarantino. In Pulp Fiction, Tarantino handed him Butch Coolidge, not just a role, but a resurrection, a bruised boxer on the run, an anti-hero forged in sweat, blood and redemption. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a declaration. But even though the performance worked on screen, behind the scenes, the chemistry didn't. Not between characters, between creator and star. Tarantino treats his scripts like sacred text. Every beat, every word, every pause is there by design. There's no ad-libbing unless he tells you to. He's not a director who says play around with it, see what sticks. He knows what sticks because he wrote it too. Bruce Willis? He'd been around long enough to take liberties. His style leaned improvisational, confident, a little cocky. He brought that classic Hollywood aura to every set, the kind that says, I've got this. But that same attitude that made him a star, made him a mismatch for Tarantino's method. According to set crew, tension often crackled when it came to interpretation. Willis wanted to shape the role. Tarantino wanted it played exactly as written. There are no extra ideas on a Tarantino set, only distractions. And then there's the matter of vibe. For Tarantino, casting isn't about getting a good actor, it's about getting the right energy. Samuel L. Jackson, Uma Thurman, John Travolta. These are people who plugged directly into his voltage. They became not just collaborators but comrades. People who'd run through fire if it matched the vision. Willis? He brought wattage, but not alignment. Even in later interviews, when Tarantino lavished praise on the Pulp Fiction ensemble, he never quite mentioned Bruce by name. When asked about who he loved working with most, the go-to roster was Jackson, Thurman, Roth, Madsen, but never Butch Coolidge. Not even a casual nod. Was it personal? Maybe not openly. They didn't clash in public. There were no headlines, no ugly quotes splashed across Variety. But in Quentin's world, being left out is a statement, because he doesn't just reuse actors, he builds legacies with them. Look at how many have returned again and again in his universe. Roth, Waltz, Madsen, Pitt. If Tarantino sees something in you, you become part of his cinematic family. Bruce was the wedding guest who didn't get invited back. Maybe it was ego, maybe it was rhythm. Maybe Quentin looked at his footage and saw a performance that lit up the frame, but not the soul of the scene. Whatever it was, Bruce Willis helped revive Pulp Fiction, and then got quietly written out of the future. No Kill Bill, no cameo in the Hateful Eight. Not even a mention during Once Upon a Time in Hollywood press tours. Just silence. That's how Quentin does it. Not with scandal, with stillness. And what's striking, Willis never once thanked Tarantino publicly for the career boost that Pulp Fiction gave him. You won't find a quote where he says, "That role saved me." There's no gushing tribute about how Quentin took a chance on him. Only a handful of brief mentions, as if it were just another weird movie he did once upon a time. In a way that says everything. For all the fireworks on the screen, the behind-the-scenes story was a Cold War unspoken, unresolved, and unfinished. From silence to shots fired, the next fallout wasn't passive-aggressive, it wasn't subtle, it was loud, it was racial, it was public. Because it's one thing to lose Quentin's trust on set, it's another to question his right to tell the story in the first place. The next actor wasn't just in his orbit, he was across the battlefield. He wasn't a struggling actor or a moody legend. He was and remains a director with his own sharp voice, his own cinematic empire, and his own unwavering convictions. And when he took aim at Quentin, Quentin fired right back. No rewrites, no apologies, just war. It wasn't a falling out. It was a full-blown philosophical war, a cultural collision that had less to do with who stood in front of the camera, and more to do with who had the right to point one in the first place. Spike Lee and Quentin Tarantino have never walked in the same shoes. They've both made films about race, identity, power, and violence. But where Spike speaks from lived experience, Tarantino approaches it with fascination. That distinction that fracture turned artistic tension into years of unfinished fire. It began with Jackie Brown in 1997. Tarantino's homage to blaxploitation cinema featured the N-word. Not once, not twice, but more times than even longtime fans were comfortable counting. For Tarantino, the language was about authenticity, a reflection of the gritty subculture his characters lived in. But for Spike Lee, it was something else. "I'm not against the word," he said in a blitz of interviews. "I use it, but Quentin is obsessed with it. He's infatuated." Lee didn't mince words. He cast a light straight onto Tarantino's creative process, and asked the question others only whispered. Why is a white filmmaker so in love with black pain, black anger, black language? The subtext was clear. Spike wasn't just saying Tarantino used the word too much, he was saying Quentin might be using it for the wrong reasons. Tarantino didn't step back. "If Spike Lee can't appreciate Jackie Brown, then I'm sorry for him," Tarantino said in a now famous quote. "He has no right to tell any other artist what they can or cannot say." And then came the quote heard around the industry. "Spike needs to shut the F*** up." From there, whatever olive branches existed were torched on both ends. Oh. But it wasn't over. Because 15 years later, Tarantino dropped a cultural grenade in cinematic form, Django Unchained, a slave revenge fantasy drenched in spaghetti western aesthetics, cartoonish ultraviolence, and endless racial tension. Again, critics divided. Some hailed it as bold, provocative, subversive. Others, including Lee, took a different stance altogether. "Disrespectful to my ancestors," Spike declared bluntly. "I will not see it." He didn't just critique the film, he refused interaction with it entirely. No screenings, no commentary, just rejection. Tarantino didn't flinch. He reinforced his artistic autonomy with a cold uppercut. "I think his problem is that I'm doing it better than he is. He's just mad because I'm making the black movies he wishes he could make." One line, one sentence, one moment that made reconciliation impossible. Because it wasn't just creative defensiveness, it wasn't even petty, it was existential. Tarantino had positioned himself not just as a filmmaker with the right to explore black narratives, but as someone better at it than the most vocal black filmmaker in the country. And in a world where art, race, ego and identity collide, that wasn't just a burn, it was a betrayal. Since then the silence has calcified. No apologies, no softening, and no crossover. Not one actor, not one producer, not one shared panel or red carpet moment has ever bridged the distance between the Tarantino camp and the Spike Lee universe. And yet the tension continues in the cultural ether. Fans still debate it, critics still cite it, But the two artists have moved on in fiercely separate lanes. Tarantino kept making films where race was always raw and front-facing. Spike Lee continued telling stories that directly challenged whiteness, and sometimes even Quentin himself. Some say issues like this can heal with time, but in this case, time didn't solve the fracture, it just fossilized it. And while Lee may not be an actor in the traditional sense, he became part of Tarantino's blacklist in a different way, not by being cast out of a role but by being deliberately kept out of a universe.
Oh.
There's no denying the talent on both sides, but identity politics, authorship, and ego took a creative disagreement and turned it into something fundamentally irreconcilable. And for Tarantino, silence usually does the job. But when someone challenges his artistic integrity, he doesn't just respond, he retaliates. With Spike Lee, artist versus artist became man versus myth and neither man blinked. But not all of Quentin's clashing relationships turned public. Some of them felt more like unsolved mysteries stories, where devotion met distance, where the silence wasn't angry, just permanent. That brings us to one of the most puzzling absences in Tarantino's career, a man who helped ignite his cinematic debut, delivered an unforgettable performance, then walked into the shadows, never to return. If there's a Hall of Fame for Tarantino performances, Steve Buscemi as Mr. Pink in Reservoir Dogs is etched at the top in bullet holes and blood. His opening monologue, that infamous "I don't tip" rant, is burned into the retinas of every young filmmaker and film school dropout who ever quoted Tarantino dialogue like scripture. Buscemi was lightning in that role, twitchy, skeptical, too smart to die early, and too slick to trust. Of all the jewel thieves, Mr. Pink was the one you remembered, that guy with the rat energy and the barbed tongue, who somehow made scumbaggery magnetic. And yet after Reservoir Dogs, Buscemi disappeared from Quentin's roster.
No Pulp Fiction.
No supporting role in Kill Bill. No bloody encore in Death Proof or Django. Nothing. And that's weird. Because Tarantino's famous for loyalty, famously infamous, in fact obsessed with building a recurring cinematic family. Michael Madsen, Tim Roth, Uma Thurman, Samuel L. Jackson. These are actors who crisscross his filmography like old scars and familiar ghosts. But Buscemi, gone without a trace, no bad-mouthing, no scandal, not even an awkward red carpet moment, just gone. So what happened? The most enduring theory whispered in Reddit threads, blog posts and film nerd lore, revolves around that Reservoir Dogs tipping scene. The one that made audiences laugh, cringe and maybe question their own restaurant behavior. Some crew members over the years have reported that the line didn't come out of thin air. It was allegedly inspired by a real behind-the-scenes moment. According to those close to the production, Buscemi himself once made similar comments off-camera expressing detachment from the whole tipping culture. A personal opinion, sure, but one that may have hit Quentin differently. Tarantino doesn't just write characters.
He curates personas.
He aligns actors with ideas and bets everything that the person playing that role is that role, even if just for the shoot. If Quentin felt Steve wasn't just playing a jerk but maybe was one when the cameras stopped rolling, that could have struck a nerve. Then came a quote, mostly forgotten except by deep dive fans. If Buscemi ever wants back in, Quentin reportedly joked, he'll have to play a waiter. Brutal, and very very Tarantino. That might have been a joke, or it might have been a line drawn in cement. And while the fallout wasn't explosive, the silence was surgical. Buscemi never publicly complained, never slammed Quentin in interviews. When asked years later if he'd like to work with Tarantino again, he simply said, I haven't heard from him in a long time, but I wish him well. It's respectful, it's cautious, but it's also hollow, like someone closing a door they never wanted shut in the first place. Let's break that down. Steve Buscemi delivered exactly what Quentin wanted, a masterclass in verbal chaos and simmering panic. Reservoir Dogs is still iconic because of Mr. Pink, and Quentin knows that. So the question isn't whether Buscemi was good enough. He was. The question is whether he was aligned with Quentin's loyalty code, with his off-camera expectations, with his tightrope vision of control. Because Tarantino doesn't demand just performance, he demands presence. If you're going to be part of his world, you can't just show up. You have to belong. And maybe even after that drop-dead amazing performance, Buscemi didn't belong. Not enough for an encore, not enough for a family invite. Fans still wonder, would he have made a killer cop in Reservoir Dogs' prequel Dreams? Could he have lit up the Hateful Eight as one of the shifty travelers? Could he have slipped into Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as a bitter, washed-up bit-part actor? All of those feel right, natural, effortless. But they never happened, because Quentin never called. In Tarantino's universe, silence speaks louder than applause. A missing name in his cast list is a decision. It's a message. Not every fallout ends in fireworks. Some are just doors that never open again. Up next, we move from tension to quiet surrender to a legend who was supposed to be Quentin's epic leading man. He had the charm, he had the clout, he had the gravitas, but what he didn't have was control. And that's where everything fell apart. Tit wasn't just a casting decision. It was a moment meant to fuse two eras. Old Hollywood royalty meets the enfant terrible of postmodern cinema. Tarantino had reportedly written the role of Bill with Beatty in mind. Every line of Bill's poetry-laced menace, every philosophical monologue about life, death and elegant violence, it was tailored around Beatty's screen persona, seductive, cerebral, a man whose smile could hide a sword. For Tarantino it could have been a masterstroke of nostalgia and narrative. Beatty. A dazzling re-entry into relevance. After years directing and acting in his own high-minded projects, working with Quentin promised a plunge into Pulp with prestige. But here's the problem. Warren Beatty isn't just an actor, he's a director, a writer, a man used to steering the ship. And when you're on a Tarantino set, there's only one captain. His name is on the screenplay. His fingerprints are on every frame.
His vision is the oxygen.
As pre-production on Kill Bill ramped up, creative discussions between Beatty and Tarantino began to derail. Beatty, like any seasoned filmmaker, started offering input suggestions on tone, tweaks to dialogue, shifts in performance tempo, normal stuff, on another set, but on Quentin's set, that's treason. David Carradine, who eventually took the role of Bill, later described the Beatty saga in blunt terms. Warren was trying to direct the director, and Quentin doesn't play that. It wasn't personal, not exactly. Quentin admired Beatty, and Beatty to this day has never trashed Quentin or the project. But in a silent tug-of-war for control, someone had. Quentin did, but not with a compromise. He walked away. It wasn't an announcement or a headline. Suddenly, Warren Beatty was not Bill. No press release, no creative differences statement, just a disappearance, surgical and silent. And Carradine, he walked in like the role was always his. In the hands of someone less self-assured, Kill Bill might have wobbled, but Carradine committed, body and soul, to Tarantino's dialogue-heavy epic.
He became the aging assassin guru,
wrapped in regret and slow-burning charisma, without ever stepping into the director's lane. And maybe that's the key. Beatty isn't known for submission, not in life, not on set, and definitely not in a project filled with killers, kung fu and katana-wielding brides. Quentin didn't need ego.
He needed obedience.
Precision. Someone who could fade into his script, not reshape it. By letting Beatty go, Quentin may have cut ties with a Hollywood icon, but he saved his movie. What's telling is that, years later, Tarantino has only vaguely referred to the casting switch. In interviews, he offers curt explanations like, "It wasn't gonna work," or "I needed someone who understood it wasn't their story." Translation: Beatty wanted a voice, Quentin wanted a vessel, and once again there's that unmistakable pattern in Tarantino's fallout list. Silence is closure. There were no jabs.
No media blows.
Just the vanishing of a possibility. Beatty never appeared in another Tarantino film, not even mentioned as a what-if. No playful nods in later projects, no meta cameos. Quentin simply edited him out of the shared mythology, and for Beatty,
he moved on.
He directed Rules Don't Apply, took home awards, remained an elder icon of Hollywood's golden generation. But that potential fusion with Tarantino, that fusion of outlaw spirit and silver screen gravitas, evaporated forever. There's something tragic and beautiful about that. The idea that we almost got Warren Beatty delivering soliloquies about vengeance and violence in Quentin's voice. The fact that we didn't, that's the cost of creative purity, when two titans can't share the frame. Because Quentin isn't just a writer-director, he's an auteur star, and in his world, there's only room for one gravitational force. If your name's not above the title, your ideas don't belong in the writer's room. For Beatty, it wasn't about failure, it was about space. The space he needed to speak, and the space Quentin didn't allow. Which brings us to our final name on the list. An actor whose reputation for being dangerously talented was only matched by how dangerously difficult he could be. A screen presence so potent, Quentin risked it all just to keep him on set, until the risks outweighed the reward, until the outbursts became the narrative, until Quentin did the one thing he does best when trust breaks. He cut, clean, and forever. If creative clashes are common in Hollywood, George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino might be one of the industry's most surprising misfires. On paper, their partnership should have been electric. The year was 1996. From Dusk Till Dawn burst onto screens, a genre-bending vampire shoot-'em-up that played like a fever dream. Written by Tarantino, directed by Robert Rodriguez, co-starring Tarantino himself, and front and center George Clooney, fresh off his TV fame in ER, stepping into his first big movie role as a gritty, tattooed outlaw named Seth Gecko. For Clooney, it was a turning point, a chance to shed the nice guy image and go full chaotic anti-hero, and to his credit, he delivered. The film is pulpy, wild, campy as hell, and for the right kind of viewer, unforgettable. So what went wrong? Fast forward almost 30 years, Clooney has never appeared in another Tarantino project, not even a cameo, no nods, no name drops, and when Quentin talks about his favorite actors, his dream collaborators, or his cinematic soulmates, Clooney is never on the list. Why? It's partly a matter of tone. For Tarantino, authenticity is everything, and Clooney, for all his charm, polish and screen power, has always carried a kind of Hollywood sheen that Quentin simply doesn't grab. To put it bluntly, Clooney is movie star, Tarantino is grindhouse raw, and Quentin doesn't just want actors who show up and nail a role, he wants believers, disciples, people who mold themselves into the shape of his vision and disappear into characters, not into their own personas. With actors like Christoph Waltz, Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, even at their peak, they adapted to Quentin, not the other way around. Clooney, he was the kind of actor who asks questions, the kind who adds ideas, the kind who, according to insiders, casually critiques lines or reinterprets beats in a scene. That doesn't fly in Tarantino's church. It didn't help that, years after From Dusk Till Dawn, Quentin made an almost surgical public comment: George Clooney is not a movie star. He allegedly said during an interview flat, without nuance, like it was a fact. A journalist in the room asked if he was joking. Quentin didn't blink. He doubled down, daring people to name a truly great Clooney film after 2000. The quote went viral. Talk shows recycled it. Fans debated it. And Clooney, when asked about Tarantino's jab, he responded with that trademark smirk. He's entitled to his opinion. Doesn't mean I agree. Polite, polished. But you could feel the tension under the surface. Some say Clooney walked away on principle. Others argue Tarantino never called again. But the result was the same. Two men who once shared a film that became a cult hit, never spoke about each other again, at least not warmly, not candidly. For Tarantino fans, it became clear that Clooney's vibe just didn't mesh with the Tarantino mold. Too glossy, too self-aware, too unwilling to surrender completely at the altar of the director's vision. In Tarantino's world, everyone's replaceable, but loyalty is irreplaceable. And loyalty means disappearing into the role, and following the script not just to the letter, but to the beat, without improv, without ego, without friction. Clooney might have fit in one movie, but he never fused with the machine, and that's the thing that ties all six of these actors together. Whether the breakups were explosive Tierney, philosophical Lee, creative Beatty, personal, silent, Willis, or subtle Clooney, the thread that runs through them all is nonconformity. Tarantino doesn't build collaborations, he builds worlds, and in those worlds, the rules are absolute. You don't rewrite them, you don't question them, you don't nudge the script, you serve the vision, or you vanish. And when Quentin Tarantino decides that you no longer belong, you're not just left out of the next film, you're cut from the story. There are only a few seats at Quentin's table, the ones who stay: Jackson, Thurman, Roth, Maltz. They're all loyalists, chameleons, warriors. They don't just act, they align. The ones who couldn't, they weren't always bad actors. In fact, they were often among the best. But the Tarantino universe doesn't run on talent alone. It runs on trust, total trust. The kind that doesn't ask why, the kind that dives in. And when you lose it, Quentin doesn't make a scene. He makes a decision. Thanks for watching.
If you love this deep dive into Tarantino's exiles, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us which actor deserves forgiveness or exile from the Tarantino verse, and if we missed someone you think belonged on this list.